I'm happy to welcome Georgia Gates and also her daughter, Liza. And we're in Chicago at Bein Fushi's on 410 South Michigan, and we're so grateful to be in the shop here. We have Heifetz playing violin behind it. We have Paganini photo and also some music. So it's a wonderful place to talk about music and the history of it because they're very connected to the history of music here. So welcome, and you two have just had some adventures in Chicago, and some of them relate to the music that you've heard about through the years. Want to tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and any thoughts you have about how that might have impacted some of the music that Crawford wrote?
Well, we always liked to come to Chicago. I grew up in southern Wisconsin, and my parents would come to Chicago a lot. They often came to the opera, and I came with them sometimes. And we also loved to go to the Art Institute and the Chicago Symphony, and so it feels fun to be back in our stomping grounds. It was a place that my father loved to come, loved the inspiration of other musicians and just the vibrance of the city.
And one of the things that you suggested we talk about is his Ballad of the Prairie State.
Yes.
That actually was a commission from the Rockford Symphony,
Which he was directing at the time.
and he had actually three bicentennial commissions. He did one for Utah, he did one for BJSO, Wisconsin, and one for Illinois. And so one of the things about doing a piece for Illinois was that he wanted to have something that was familiar, interwoved with the rest of it. And we found out that the Ballad of Casey Jones, he was actually driving a train in Illinois when he crashed. And so Crawford put that into his music. There's the train going faster and faster, and the horns blowing, and then all of a sudden a big crash. And so it was quite a dramatic thing. He also put the state song of Illinois in that piece. And so it had several things that were familiar to people of Illinois. And then it was performed in Rockford first, but then it was also performed by the Chicago Symphony, and people enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Was Crawford leading the premiere with Rockford Symphony, or was it after he had left?
No, that would have been while he was still the conductor.
Sure. And we see a program from the Chicago Symphony about their performance of that piece. Do you have any memories of that premiere, or was it indoors, was it outdoors, was it, what did you think? And did Crawford know any of the brass players from the Chicago Symphony?
Yes, he did. I do remember the premiere of this because it was done when the Chicago Symphony visited Rockford, and at the time the Rockford Symphony was performing in a big kind of an arena. It was made more for sports, but it had pretty good sound, and the orchestra set up there and played this program, and was very well received. And Crawford was able to take a bow. He didn't do the conducting on that himself, but he was very pleased that the Chicago Symphony performed it.
I'll just tell a little bit about this piece. My father was great at writing pieces that have a storyline and that are very evocative of a place, a situation, a personality, an event. And he really wanted to celebrate the Midwest and its prairies and rivers and forests, its factories, its cities, and he just would say that that was typical of the American optimistic, vigorous, moving spirit. And he also tended to write with a sort of sense of joy and he says this was actually in a sonata allegro form. And he states the three themes early on, and then in the exposition he inserts sort of that spirit of America. The second one is Casey Jones. The third one is a lament, not only for Casey Jones, but for all the sad events that happen in the history of any place. The Chicago fire he mentions, the persecution of people in Carthage and Nauvoo. He says more recently the difficulties in Cairo, and he wrote this in late 70s, early 80s. I'm not sure what he was referring to, but he says that the fourth event is of these four is using the By the Rivers Gently Flowing. This is the Illinois State song. Then he restates the original theme in a shortened form and ends with a sort of joyous conclusion at the coda. A bright, excited conclusion is the way he described it. It's a really fun piece that has lots of fun things in it, including the crash. And he also described that he described the steam rising above the wreck after the crash, which made me want to go back and listen to that again.
It wasn't connected to this piece, but he did know, was it Dale Clevenger, is he?
Yes.
Is he the one? He became acquainted, I don't know if Dale Clevenger came and played a solo with him or exactly how that happened, but they knew each other, and Dale Clevenger suggested to him that he should write a piece for their brass section. And he said, but don't make it too far out. And so Crawford took that very seriously, and he wrote a piece. We had just made a trip to England, and at that time he could come right into Stonehenge. Could walk around among the stones, which you can't do now. He was so taken with Stonehenge, and I said, well, why don't you use that as a theme for the Chicago brass piece? And he did write a wonderful piece called Stonehenge, which was for brasses, and it was played by quite a few of the brass ensembles, and we have a nice recording of it from one of the performances. And it was very evocative pieces, because he was able somehow to transfer ideas into notes on a page, and he was very good at that.
So we have a mother and daughter here who appreciate not only Crawford's music, but you're both musicians, and Georgia, you have a long history of performance on keyboard especially, but I understand you're also the orchestra librarian at the BJSO, right? And we have Liza here, who's also teaches piano and is a pianist, keyboardist, and are your vocalists. So can you tell us a little bit about music growing up in the Gates household? Because you have both mom and dad are musicians, and so did you all play together or sing? Tell us about that.
We did sing together a lot. My mother often accompanied the four of us, and we would sing for lots of different kinds of local events. Particularly, we sang a lot for church events. And in our Mormon household, we sang a lot of religious music and hymns. I remember one time when our bishop was leaving, my mother rewrote the words to one of the songs from Mikado, and instead of Our Great Mikado, Virtuous Man, we sang Our Great Bishop John Berger, Virtuous Man, and she rewrote all the words. We often did that kind of thing, rewrote the words and sang for different kinds of events. There was a church quartet festival in Milwaukee, which was about an hour and a half from where we lived, and my mother decided that we were going to sing a quartet, and there were a lot of good musicians. We just actually sang a duet from Hans Christian Andersen, the musical called Thumbelina, and we won the competition even though we weren't singing in four parts. So we thought we were really something. But we did sing a lot in the car. We sang rounds a lot, which I did with my children because I think it really develops the ear really well. And
well, and you children also did a kind of a mini version of Charlie Brown.
Yes.
We had.
Which she was the editor of that. She chose what we were going to do. Minimal costumes, but we did do, that was really fun.
Yeah.
You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown is what that was from. And
Sure.
the four of us did a lot of singing. I remember after watching The Sound of Music, we were at Jackson Hole for the summer. My father was conducting, not for the summer, but for a week or two. And we didn't have anybody else to play with, so we took hikes to the woods singing the songs from Sound of Music, which we had gotten pretty excited about. I do remember coming home, and my father would be at the piano a lot. Sometimes he was composing, sometimes he was working on something that he was going to conduct. And one time in particular, that sticks out in my memory, but is very typical. I came home and he was playing pieces of Tchaikovsky's Pathetique. And I remember coming to the door and saying, "What is that?" Because I just thought it was so lovely. So he had me sit down on the bench, and he started playing little excerpts, and he said, "Isn't this glorious?" So it was really a fun household to grow up in, with my parents both very involved in music. My mother did a lot of accompanying and sang with groups, and she did a lot of her own musical projects, and then she was very helpful with my father. She would sit down and play something that he had written, and she would play it just as he wrote. Oh, left out the F sharp. She would play what was there, so she was a good proofreader that way. So they were a great team, and it was a fun, very musical household. All of us got up early to practice. My eldest brother was the best at it. He would practice the violin for an hour and the piano for an hour before school. And we were all supposed to get up and practice, and I sort of dawdled. It was my turn at the piano. But a lot of music. It was fun.
And I understand that effort of tag team, having you and Crawford work together, happened when you wrote the solo piano version of the Fanfare for Lake Country. Can you tell us a little bit about that piece? Because we know that he wrote the orchestral version of the Fanfare for Lake Country, and then the solo violin version came next, right? And then was the solo piano version. Now you're a keyboardist and Crawford's a composer, and maybe just a little open door for us.
I would make a suggestion here and there, but he started, I mean, I was a pianist of sorts, but he was really a wonderful pianist. Everything that he wrote for piano, he could play better than anyone else, because he knew how it was supposed to go and what was supposed to happen. So, you know, he was at home at the piano. So I did suggest, you know, you've got the piano, violin, all you have to do is combine them in a way that works, and he was able to do that. This wasn't the last piece that he wrote, but it was probably the last big orchestral piece that he wrote. And so after that, he did some smaller things, smaller groups and so forth, but nothing as ambitious as that.
Mm-hmm. We're here at a wonderful violin shop, Bein Fushi's, and they have instruments from all eras around the world, and they're known with fine instruments as well as, you know, most makers. And so Crawford has some chamber music for stringed instruments and for violin. Certainly he wrote the violin piano version of the Fanfare. Can you tell me about Crawford and his relationship to stringed instruments? Because of course they were in the orchestra, but he wrote for them as solos and he wrote for them as chamber music. And do you have any memories of like any of the chamber pieces or anything that would be related to?
Well, he actually played, I think he started out on the violin, but in grade school they had a little orchestra and he played the viola. He said it was always because his arms were long enough to play the viola. But he was never a fabulous string player, but he certainly had a knowledge of how they work and what they could do, and had a fondness for the violin. And he wrote, he was asked by a young woman who was getting her bachelor's degree, I think it was, at Juilliard School, and she entered some kind of a contest in which some of the music was specified, but one of the things that she had to do was get a composer from her country, which happened to be America, to write a piece for her. He wrote a very flashy piece for her, and as it turned out, her mother died and she didn't ever finish up the requirements of the contest, but she did record it and play it several times. It's a very difficult, tricky piece because it was supposed to show her off, and so she requested that, and also had a difficult accompaniment part, but it has been played by several old violinists many different times. And he had intended to make that the third movement of a violin concerto, and that was on his list of things that he wanted to do, and he talked to her about it, and she said, "Oh, I'll be happy to play it when you finish it." But he had two movements. He had the middle movement, which was more serene, beautiful melody, Savior's Love. And so he only had to do the first movement, but never got to that.
I'm not very familiar with most of the chamber music that he wrote for strings, but I do remember some solo work that he did. He's a good friend with a violinist named Jenny Oakes Baker, who's very, very gifted, and she played some of his music. And then at his funeral, Kelly Parkinson's a very fine violinist that played a waltz that he had written. And the thing that strikes me when I think about watching both of those young women play this music is just how much they enjoyed the wonderful way that he wrote melodies, the flourishes at the end of phrases that just allowed them to be so expressive. And there was a time when my father was conducting, I can't think what piece this was, Jenny Oakes Baker was playing it, it was his piece, he was conducting it. And I was watching a televised version of it because I wasn't there live. And I so wish I had this photograph in which you can see the violinist who's really not following the conductor, he's following her, my father's following her, but she looks up at him, you know, sort of between her fingers almost, to communicate with him. Even though she did not need to do that, there was just this wonderful moment where she's looking up at him and watching him conducting the orchestra and watching him watch her. It was really, I thought, oh, I need a photograph of that, but don't know how to get one.
Well, I think his favorite pieces were choral orchestral. He just liked to have these massive groups together, but I was thinking also in terms of just chamber music, that he was invited by a publisher that was just getting started, and their focus on publishing was to publish things for school orchestras. And they asked him to do a chamber group kind of a piece, which he did. I mean, he didn't like to write down. He liked to stretch everybody to the nth degree, but in this case he did write down to make it accessible to young musicians. Wrote a lovely little string suite, which was sold by this company to many schools. In fact, he had some phone calls from conductors who had bought this piece and said, well, when you did this, what were you thinking about this? And how about this? And so he got some feedback on that piece that he wrote from people that were working with it. It was valuable too.
we're in Chicago. Let's go back to Chicago. So, because we're here. And you were in Rockford for many years, and actually Beloit Change Hill isn't so far from Chicago. So we know that this is a musical hub. And you visited the Art Institute yesterday, and Crawford has a piece based on art. Any stories about his appreciation of art, or any visits to the Art Institute here, or other art-inspired things?
We always enjoyed going to the Art Institute, and a few times we came down to a matinee of the Chicago Symphony. One time, the daughter of one of his players was in sort of a competition, and she soloed with the Chicago Symphony, and Crawford wanted to support his player and her daughter, and we came down to that. And then we would often just walk the little way between Symphony Hall and the Art Institute, and we had some favorite pieces that we liked to see. One wasn't even there yesterday when we came, but the Rainy Day in Paris. Always liked that.
And he was very fond of the Impressionists as well.
Yeah, and there were, during the time that we lived in Wisconsin, there were 2 exhibits that the Art Institute put on that were Monet exhibits, and so popular because his paintings were popular when he was alive, and a lot of demand for his paintings, but interest in Monet has continued on, and we just saw several lovely Monets yesterday when we were here. Things that belong to the Art Institute, and so they're there most of the time, but these exhibits had much more too. And an exhibit in Berlin has A Rainy Day in Paris, so we missed seeing that. But it's always a treat to see the wonderful things that they have. Mm-hmm. And it's changed very much from when we used to come fairly often, but only better.
And there's a specific piece that you've indicated Crawford wrote about artwork, and if I believe it's for solo piano, is that correct?
That's correct. Now, that was a book that was put together by a New York man named Glenn Nelson. He called it Mormoniana, because all of the participants were Mormons in Michigan. Well, we don't say that now, but he had a relative, his name was Douglas Snow, who was quite an impressionistic style of painting, and so he used that as his inspiration and wrote a lovely piece. Some of these pieces are very far out, or using notation that you never saw ever again, but his was fairly straightforward as far as being accessible. And in fact, your daughter has used that piece, and she learned to play it.
And my father loved to write with something like that as a hook. And a painting was, oh, I know what to do with that. Or if he had, when he was doing film scores, or when he was doing music for a pageant, and someone would say 2 minutes and 17 seconds, and someone would say to him, isn't that limiting to say you've got to have this piece be 2 minutes and 17 seconds? He said, no, that gives me a parameter, and I love to work with that kind of thing. And so a painting was a fun way for him to get a start on something, or a story like Casey Jones. Or he was really good at making that kind of jump into music. I like that aspect.
Well, also I see on your list of things that we might talk about, the lyric opera. And we were devotees, you might say, of the Chicago Lyric Opera for many years. Crawford was part-time faculty member at Beloit College, and he taught a course on the operas that were being produced that year, and then he would take his students, plus many townspeople, on a bus down to Chicago. Lyric. Have tickets for everybody, they had to pay for them. But we enjoyed those operas so much, and saw some wonderful performers during that time. And actually, Crawford, when we moved from Wisconsin to Utah, he had in mind, and he began work on an opera. And he felt like he had a very good background in opera because he'd attended so many fine opera settings. And even after he was not teaching anymore, we would come down just in a car by ourselves to go to the opera, because that was such a vital and interesting part of life during our time here. Now we like to listen to and see the broadcasts of the Met. You get so much more in those broadcasts. And you get close-ups of the faces, which if you're in the audience, you don't really see that. And close-ups of the sets and the costumes and any little things that are going on you see so well because they're being photographed. They can zero in on those things. And if you're at the Met, which is a wonderful experience, certainly, but it's a little teeny space down here that you don't see a lot of detail. So he liked the idea of seeing so many things and so much detail. Opera was being performed.
And he wrote opera, and so clearly that fed that. How about his conducting? So he is a conductor of significant accomplishment, and he had a young start. We know that he went to Tanglewood, and that Maurice Abravanel was somebody he had contact with. But he led the Rockford, Illinois Symphony, the Quincy Symphony, the Beloit Janesville Symphony, and he's conducted others. I wonder if there's anything that we have about how he kept himself fresh, and what any things that he really appreciated about conducting, or stories you have about him preparing works, or any performances or efforts that he made that are memorable to you.
Well, for one thing, he liked to memorize the score. He did not like to have to look down, and I think that's a really significant aspect. He wanted to have eye contact with the players. He didn't want to look away. He wanted to be able to he wanted the whole thing in his head. And I asked him about it one time, and he not only memorized the notes, he knew where every accent was. He knew where every crescendo was, which is astounding. But he worked very hard at that over the weeks before rehearsals and during rehearsals, so that he could be that kind of conductor that was that in tune with the players and the music. I think that was one of the main aspects of his success.
He even memorized the rehearsal letters and numbers.
Right. Oh, that was very important because you have to be able to go back
Quickly.
He had to know exactly where he was all the time and where he wanted to go back to.
But it impressed the players as well. Sometimes it worried the players if, he doesn't have a score, how's he going to conduct us? But he was very determined, and that came from probably his first year in students to know whatever score they were working on. He would put a recording on the turntable and play for a while, and then he'd take the needle off and say, now where are we? And the student was supposed to know that everything about it, who was playing, what notes they were playing, what letter it was, and that just became his model of memorization. And he felt like he could do a better job when he was not tied to the score. But when he had soloists, they didn't like him conducting without a score, so he always used to score with soloists, so that, if the soloist got lost, there would be some way to figure out where you were.
Another aspect is that he had great rapport. I mean, he was naturally a people person anyway, but he just communicated so well with players, and he just had a joie de vivre that was so palpable, and he was so enthusiastic, as that story I told earlier about. He just was so enthralled and loved this music. He just felt the message of the music, felt the emotion of the music, and he communicated that well. But he used to tell players, he would make a correction. He would always say something like, "French horns, we love you. Could you get that F sharp a little higher?" I mean, he would correct in such a loving way and express so much that he had confidence in them and that he enjoyed working with them. And players just loved him because he was that way. I mean, he knew that there are lots of conductors that shouted and yelled at people and berated them, and he just didn't think that was effective at all. He wanted to have a wonderful feeling.
To be a family and to know each other and to get along with each other.
He didn't want them to be afraid of what he was going to say to them. So it was always kind and respectful when he made corrections. He didn't like people to be late. He expected them to be there right on time, right when the downbeat came down at 6:30, I think it was, for Boyd's Sunday rehearsals. Because he said, in the first 5 minutes, I made 5 corrections. You're 5 minutes late, you've missed the changes that we've already made, or things like that, emphasized. So I remember at dinner time on rehearsal nights, if the phone rang, he'd go, "Oh, somebody else is not going to be there."
But if someone couldn't come, he would just break his neck to get someone else to sit in that chair. So there were no empty chairs. Someone that could
So you could hear what it was going to sound like.
Yes, and so he was very concerned about having everybody there, and if the regulars weren't there, then he wanted some people to fill in that space. And
So he was very demanding, but people loved playing with him because they liked being held to such a high standard, and they liked the quality that came out of it.
Mm-hmm. And we're in a place that does string players, we're talking about the orchestra and the players. How about concertmaster stories? Now, actually, there's one, because that's how I met Crawford first and came to BJSO, because Norm Paulu was the concertmaster there, and he had to be gone, and so I came in as a substitute concertmaster for several concerts, so that I enjoyed that, and of course was a substitute conductor as well. But how about other concertmaster stories?
well, I don't know if I have stories about concertmasters, because they change quite regularly, and Crawford always had a good concertmaster. Norman Paulu was one of his favorites, because it felt like Norman raised the level of the playing of all the people, and that's what you want, is the quality to go up. But he had some local people. Lucy Heiberg was a fine violinist, and Elizabeth Batesky for a short period. And I remember that Symphony. He was the concertmaster for a pretty short time, but I remember him saying, it didn't have anything to do with conducting, but he said, I work at night. Like so many people that work at night have some kind of a drab job. He worked at night, being an artist, so that was good.
I have one more thing to say about conducting. He loved the joke that said, rather than Teddy Roosevelt's speak softly and carry a big stick, he would say that conductors speak loudly and carry a small stick.
Crawford wrote a number of works for orchestra. He had symphonies, he had short, showy pieces, he had oratorios, he had concerti. Can you tell us anything that you would know about the various symphonies? He has 7 symphonies, I believe, right? And any, either the flow, the growth, or the pattern within them, or any that are special to you? And also any of the inspirations for the short numbers, or your impressions to them, and any favorites?
I can mention a few things about the symphony. I know that the first symphony was written while he was doing his PhD. That was his dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
And years later, it's like he wasn't aware of it, but years later, he said he could feel the angst of World War II and his fears of when he was in the Navy that he wouldn't come back. And he said, didn't realize it when he was writing it, but some of that is in there. And I don't know all the symphonies well enough to say this for sure, but my impression from what he said is that has more heavy, dark in it than any of his other pieces, which tend to be so optimistic generally. Would you say that's true?
Yes, although he did write, I think his 3rd symphony was written in the 12-tone row, because he just felt like he needed to do something like that. He didn't really believe in it, but everybody was doing it then, and that was what the public was thinking, this is the new thing. And he went down to somewhere in Texas, Dallas or Houston, and it was performed there. And you know, for the time, that was a popular thing. It's not so now, but it
And
was
he
just
later-
sort of, he did it because he wanted to show that he could do it.
And that he understood what was, but he later said that he said, people like melody, people like harmony. The academics still enjoy some of those kinds of things, but generally people want to hear things that have that melody in there. And he loves to write melody and loved to write harmony. He wrote the 2nd symphony, which became the music to a pageant that was done in upstate New York for over 60 years every summer for thousands of people. And he did a lot, there was a lot of interest in it. And when he came back, he did a lot of evening programs where they would invite people into their home or somewhere else. People want to hear the stories about how it was written. And I remember as a child being scared to death because the opening fanfare was this trumpet fanfare that was just sort of electrifying and so frightened me. I'd be like, wake up I wouldn't wake up, I wouldn't be asleep yet because she'd put us to bed and then they'd do this music. I could hear the music, we had a really good sound system. So that was I associate him doing those evening programs with being really frightened, and I would get to sleep and wouldn't hear the rest of it. But
I
there's a
never
lot of
thought of that being frightening.
da 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 da.
Yeah.
Just very sort of arresting. Is really what it was. But for a little kid, it was scary.
Like triumphant.
Well,
Yeah,
really-
but you felt what you felt.
it was. And later on, I came to appreciate it. I just thought it was a terrific opening, wonderful use of brass to make an opening, and it has lots of wonderful melodies in it, and other places that were favorites of mine, and I've seen that a number of times. And all of our family met in upstate New York in 2005, I think it was. Is that the year we went? Because the 4 of us kids all wanted our children to hear it. We'd been with my parents when we were growing up, but our children hadn't heard it, so we wanted them all to hear it and hear the stories of how it was written, because it was such a historical piece for that part of the world and something that our father was so well known for. So then during that weekend that we were there and watched it a couple of times, we were there for rehearsal and 2 performances, and we found a place that we could sit down as a family, and we said, Dad, tell the kids the stories, tell them about writing this, tell them the wonderful experiences he had during the year. I think it was a year that he was writing it. Was it 2 years?
4 years.
4 years.
Because he was at
Also-
that time teaching 4 classes and doing piano. I mean, just enough to keep things together. And so he didn't have a lot of time to compose. And it all came off very well. It was recorded by the Utah Symphony.
And they rewrote it 30 years later and asked him to do the rewrite. So he used a lot of the same original material and then said, okay, this one needs to be a minute longer and this one needs to be a minute shorter. And then he wrote some new material for it as well. So that was really fun that he got to do the second version of it. And then it's gone on 30 years since then, a little over 30 years. So that was the second symphony. And I also remember especially the fourth symphony, although I didn't get to see the premiere. That was done for the bicentennial, and it was the Utah Symphony and the Tabernacle Choir combining.
First time they were ever together.
Performed together, even though they're both the big Utah musical institutions, they never worked together. So that was a big deal. And he had a libretto by a local poet that he worked with, and it was called A New Morning. And it talked about the writing of the Constitution and the founding fathers and the stories that took place there. I heard it in the process. I was home working for the summer between college years, and I didn't get to go out to hear the premiere, but I felt like I was really familiar with the music, and I heard lots of recordings of it. And lots of wonderful melodies, and the way that he has a big wall of sound as the chorus comes up in certain places. I thought it was a pretty magnificent piece of work.
What was the 5th?
Carolandra, I think.
Oh,
Taken from C.S. Lewis, from a book that C.S. Lewis had written.
that was written for a big anniversary of the Beloit Janesville Symphony. And there was such a crowd, such a throng to hear that. People were sitting in the aisles or on any stairs.
And that's a big venue besides.
Yes.
There's a lot of seats. It was just packed.
Nowadays, unless you are in a big city like Chicago or even Salt Lake is a wonderful symphony. And very devoted followers and people that are willing to pitch in their money. A lot of money has to be raised, but a smaller place is an awfully hard time keeping going. And when Crawford left BGSO, they have brought in a new conductor. It's very good, but it's just sort of gone downhill, sorry to say. Doesn't have that much public support. And you've got to have that. Make it go.
So we worked up, we were working our way up the symphonies, which is good. And I want to go back to conducting in a moment, but let's keep going on symphonies. So we.
So 6 and 7, I actually can't think which ones those are.
Well, one, I don't know if it was 6 or 7, but one was the one he did for Mu Phi Epsilon, their big 50th anniversary or whatever. And a lady that he knew was in a position to commission him to, I think 6 is the second version of the War music.
Oh, right, okay.
And so
So
this
this is
would be
very
the fifth.
different. And 7 is the Phi Epsilon.
Yeah. Well, no, is that it? Yeah. But I wanted to mention another orchestral piece, which was commissioned by the BJSO, and this was their bicentennial piece, the Wisconsin Profiles. And rather than doing something similar to what he'd done for Illinois, he did 4 little pieces, smaller pieces, and
Each one tied to a place.
picked out certain places that these pieces would represent. One was starting out the icy beginnings of Wisconsin. The ice coming down, the coldness. And he had the players through their teeth go, which
Nobody
was
could tell what the heck this sound, what are they doing? Because they're playing at the same time.
right. And so he, he had in mind interpreting something visual into music, and he was always very good at that. And then the second one was Baraboo, which is the circus world. And that's a really fun piece. It's a trampoline, not the trampoline, but the trapeze going back and forth, and
The calliope.
yes, and all. I mean, you can just see a circus when that's playing, and I don't remember what the thing was.
Is that one Spring Green?
Might have been Spring Green, just very beautiful, pastoral kind of a piece. And then the ending was the builder with vision. The map was supposed to be sort of an homage to Frank Lloyd Wright. So he just chose each one of those places to be represented musically.
And the Spring Green one, he used a melody that my sister wrote in a humanities class where they had to write a melody with a simple harmony. And she sent home, "Here, Dad, I just wrote this for my humanities class." She was not a music major or even did any other music classes that I know of, but he then thought, well, that's a cute little melody, and he fleshed it out and put that into this movement, this piece, Spring Green. And so Kathy's piece is memorialized in a lovely version that he put into that.
And those are wonderful stories. He has another series that was written for Madison, and it's called Lake Songs. But also I was seeing that Cityscapes was also written for Madison. So I have 2 questions. Can we talk about those 2 Madison pieces? Are there any other Madison pieces? And any other pieces that would be for other locales that have stories behind them?
Well, the ones for Madison, one was for the Madison Symphony, and one was for the Madison Chamber Orchestra. So those are 2 different entities.
Sure.
And the one, the Lake Songs, he was thinking sort of as the, on a similar pattern of pictures in an exhibition where you're kind of moving from one lake to another, and he personified the lakes in different ways. And one was boats sailing on it, one was ice skaters, and I don't remember what all, but and that was very popular and done by the Madison Symphony. And then the one for the Chamber Orchestra, the fellow that conducted that, well, I shouldn't say that, the one fellow that we knew that was on the board somehow or other, he approached Crawford and said he would like a piece. And so that resulted in salute. And that was a completely different kind of an approach, and he was showing the busy city, honking horns and different things. And this friend that had sort of commissioned this said, oh, I can just see a city board arguing and all kinds of difficulties that are going on in the city. And and that was quite a short piece, but they liked it. And he was happy to do it. He always liked to work with commissions. He didn't just write music to put on the shelf or for an occasion. And so he always had a deadline, usually did. And that was also a good thing. You know, I have to have it finished by such and such. I remember this took place in Illinois, involved in the University of Illinois, I think. But it was, they were having a horn convention at this university, and it turned out that the fellow that was the president of the horn consortium, or whatever it was, had been for a short time a percussionist under Dad when he was a student at DeKalb. And so they were going to have this big deal, and they had some extra money for some reason, and this fellow said to his senior professor, what shall I do with this money? And he said, well, why don't you commission a piece? So, and he knew Crawford, knew that he wrote pieces, and so he contacted and said, I'd like you to write a piece for this occasion, then it will be performed at the horn concerto or horn conference.